On a freezing Christmas night, a lonely little girl sat on a sidewalk, shivering, forgotten, and praying for a miracle. No one stopped until a black car pulled up, and out stepped the city's most feared Mafia boss. But what began as an act of mercy soon spiraled into a fight for redemption, love, and the meaning of family. What secret did that child carry that could melt the heart of a man the world called a monster? Before we dive into today's emotional story, I'd love to know, where are you watching me from, and what's the time there right now? And hey, if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our amazing family for more heart-touching stories every week. The soft glow of morning crept through the tall curtains of Damien's mansion, bathing the polished marble in muted gold. The silence was thick, broken only by the slow rhythm of Isabella's breathing as she lay on the silk-covered bed. Her eyelashes fluttered, and with a sharp gasp, her eyes flew open. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The scent of expensive cologne, the heavy drapes, the grand chandelier, all felt foreign, intimidating. Then she turned her head and saw him. Damien Moretti stood near the window, half hidden in shadow, his broad shoulders tense, his eyes unreadable. The man she once thought dead, the man whose choices had destroyed everything she'd ever loved, was standing just a few feet away. You're still alive?" she whispered, her voice breaking, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something dangerously close to anger. Damien turned slowly, his expression haunted but soft. "I saved your daughter," he said quietly, almost as if he were confessing a sin. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world outside faded. Only the echo of that sentence lingered in the air between them, like a fragile thread of fate refusing to break. Then, a small voice pierced the silence. "Mommy!" Lily ran into the room, her little pink frock fluttering behind her, her golden curls bouncing as she leapt into Isabella's arms. The mother's tears flowed instantly as she clutched her child to her chest, her body trembling with relief. The sound of her sobs filled the room, each one slicing through Damien's heart. She kissed her daughter's forehead again and again, whispering broken prayers of gratitude. For a brief moment, love washed over the wounds of time, until Isabella looked up and saw Damien stepping closer. Her arms instinctively tightened around Lily, her expression shifting from gratitude to guarded pain. "Don't," she said sharply, her tone trembling. Damien froze mid-step, the rejection cutting through him like a blade. "You ruined my life once, Damien," she said, her voice rising with years of buried hurt. "Victor took Lily from me because I defended you, because I said you weren't the monster everyone believed you to be." The words struck him harder than any bullet. Damien's breath hitched as memories slammed into him. The night he ordered the hit on Victor's men, the screams, the flames, and the moment he heard that Isabella had vanished. He had told himself she was safe, that by staying away he had protected her from his world. But now he understood that his silence had delivered her straight into hell. The guilt tore through him with merciless precision. His knees gave way and he sank to the floor, his head bowed, his voice breaking like glass. "I'm not the same man anymore," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't want blood or power or revenge. I just want redemption." His trembling hands reached toward her, but Isabella stepped back, clutching Lily's hand as if he were still the monster from her nightmares. Her heart warred with her mind. The man before her wasn't the ruthless king of the underworld she remembered. His eyes carried sorrow instead of pride, pain instead of rage. Yet the scars he left on her life were still bleeding. Isabella turned her face away, unable to bear the weight of his remorse. "You don't get to ask for redemption, Damien," she said quietly. "Not after what you've done." Her voice cracked on the last word. Damien lowered his head, nodding silently. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the quiet sobbing of Lily, who didn't understand why her mother's tears wouldn't stop. Then Isabella guided her daughter toward the door. "I'll take Lily and go," she murmured. "You've done enough." But before she could step out, Damien's voice stopped her. "You can't leave now," he said, his tone laced with urgency. Isabella turned sharply, suspicion flashing in her eyes. Damien hesitated, then sighed. "Someone saw me at the cafe. They know you're alive. If Victor finds out..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Isabella froze, her hands trembling on Lily's shoulders, the color drained from her face. Victor Kane, her ex-husband, Damien's nemesis, the man who turned her life into a nightmare, the same man who had taken her child away once. The memory of his cruelty made her heart race. "He'll come for me," she said in a whisper. Damien nodded grimly. "He'll come for both of you." For a moment, fear united them. The predator and the prey, the sinner and the saint, bound by the same danger that once tore them apart. Damien walked to the window, his reflection ghosted in the glass. The city lights flickered in the distance like dying stars. He clenched his fists, trying to keep his anger buried. He didn't want violence anymore, but he would kill again if it meant keeping Isabella and Lily safe. Later that night, silence swallowed the mansion. Lily slept peacefully in a guest room, her tiny hand clutching her stuffed bear, while Isabella sat awake, staring at the moonlight pouring through the window. She looked around at the lavish room, at the quiet luxury that felt like a cage, and wondered how fate had led her back to the one man she swore she'd never see again. Meanwhile, Damien stood alone in his office, an untouched glass of whiskey in his hand. His reflection looked back at him from the window, a ghost in a tailored suit, a man who had everything and lost his soul. His mind raced with thoughts of Isabella's tears, her trembling voice, the way she looked at him with both hatred and the faintest glimmer of the past. He didn't know what hurt more, the memories of what he'd done, or the fear that she'd never forgive him. He set the glass down and rubbed his face, exhaustion weighing on him. That's when his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it, assuming it was one of his men checking in. But then he saw the name flashing on the screen, Victor Kane. His pulse spiked. Slowly, Damien lifted the phone to his ear, his breath steady but his eyes darkening. The line crackled, followed by a familiar voice, cold, smug, and dripping with venom. "You found my ex-wife and daughter," Victor said, his tone sharp as a blade. "Now I'm coming for them, and you." The call ended abruptly, leaving only the hollow echo of threat in the room. Damien's grip tightened around the phone until the glass shattered in his palm, blood dripping down his wrist. He didn't even flinch. Outside the mansion gates, hidden beneath the cover of the storm, Victor's men were already watching. One of them raised binoculars and whispered into a radio, "Target confirmed. The boss wants them alive." The night fell heavy over the city, swallowing the mansion in a blanket of uneasy silence. The storm had stopped, but the air carried something darker, an anticipation that made every light flicker like a warning. Inside, Damien paced through the dimly lit corridor, his senses sharp, his instincts restless. He had been in too many wars to mistake peace for safety. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, and the sound of tires crunching gravel sliced through the night. He froze. His men stationed at the gates hadn't reported anyone approaching. His hand instinctively moved to the pistol tucked under his coat, and before he could reach the window, the world exploded in chaos. The first bullet shattered the glass, scattering shards across the marble floor. Alarms screamed through the mansion as gunfire erupted outside. Damien's men shouted orders, taking cover behind pillars and overturned furniture. The storm of bullets painted the night red and gold. "Get down!" Damien roared, grabbing Isabella by the arm and pulling her toward the ground. Lily screamed as a chandelier crashed behind them, sparks flying. He turned, his heartbeat pounding like war drums, eyes burning with rage. He had sworn never to fight again, but fate had never been kind to men like him. In that instant, the ruthless boss within him awoke, not out of vengeance, but out of love. He fired back with brutal precision, every shot a promise of protection. Outside, Victor's men advanced like shadows, masked and merciless. The once peaceful mansion became a battlefield. Bullets tore through portraits, through glass, through memories. The scent of gunpowder mixed with the sweetness of Christmas decorations that still hung from the walls, an ugly reminder of what was supposed to be a night of peace. Damien moved swiftly, shielding Isabella and Lily behind the grand piano in the living room. Lily crouched beneath it, her little body trembling, tears streaking her cheeks. "Mommy, I'm scared!" she cried, clutching her teddy bear as the echoes of gunfire filled the room. Isabella held her close, whispering soothing words through her own fear, her heart splitting at the sight of her child's terror. Damien reloaded his weapon, the cold determination in his eyes returning. But it wasn't the same fury that once fueled him. He wasn't fighting for dominance anymore. He was fighting for the two souls who had given his life meaning. A bullet grazed his arm, spinning him slightly. Pain surged through his muscles, hot and searing, but he didn't stop. He gritted his teeth and kept shooting, his blood staining his white shirt crimson. Isabella screamed his name as she saw him stumble, but before she could reach him, a masked intruder stormed through the side door, gun raised. Without hesitation, Isabella grabbed Damien's fallen pistol from the floor. Her hands shook, but her eyes burned with fierce resolve. The man aimed at Damien, but Isabella pulled the trigger first. The recoil jolted her back, the shot echoing like thunder. The bullet hit its mark. The attacker fell instantly, the mask slipping to reveal one of Victor's men, eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, time stood still. Damien turned to see Isabella standing there, gun in hand, chest heaving, tears glistening on her cheeks. The fragile nurse he once knew was gone. In her place stood a woman forged by pain, courage, and maternal fire. "I won't let anyone take her again," she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. Damien stared at her, awe softening the edges of his pain. In that instant, he realized that she wasn't the one who needed saving anymore. She was his strength. Together, they fought like two halves of a soul, long divided by fate. More men burst through the broken windows, their boots crunching on shattered glass. Damien fired with one hand, clutching his bleeding arm with the other, while Isabella reloaded beside him. The gunfire roared for what felt like hours until, one by one, Victor's men fell or fled into the darkness. When the last echo of battle faded, only smoke and silence remained. The mansion was a wreck, walls scarred with bullet holes, the floor littered with debris and blood. Damien leaned against a pillar, breathing heavily, his arm wrapped in a blood-soaked cloth. Isabella knelt beside him, trembling, her hands still gripping the gun. Lily crawled out from under the piano, her small voice breaking the stillness. "Is it over, Mommy?" she asked softly, her wide eyes glistening. Isabella hugged her tightly, whispering, "Yes, baby, it's over." But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Damien forced himself to stand, his movement slow but steady. He walked toward one of the fallen bodies and froze. It was Victor Kane, alive but wounded, clutching his side, blood soaking through his tailored jacket. Damien's eyes hardened. He crouched beside him, his gun still smoking. Victor looked up, a twisted grin spreading across his lips despite the pain. "You think this ends here?" he hissed. Damien said nothing. He simply picked up Victor's phone, its screen still glowing faintly. A new message notification blinked. Against his better judgment, Damien opened it, and his blood ran cold. On the screen was a video, grainy but clear enough to see. The footage showed a man in Damien's own mansion, wearing his insignia ring, handing over security blueprints to Victor's men. The man's face turned toward the camera, and Damien's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just any traitor. It was one of his most trusted men, someone who had sworn loyalty to him for years. The betrayal burned deeper than any bullet. His heart pounded as he watched the video end with Victor's voice laughing in the background, mocking him. As Damien lowered the phone, realization dawned. Someone inside his own Mafia had sold him out. But before he could react, a distant explosion shook the ground, and the mansion's power went out. plunging them all into darkness once again. The morning after the attack dawned gray and hollow, the sky still bruised with the smoke of the night before. Damien's mansion stood wounded, shattered windows, bullet holes carved into marble, and the faint smell of gunpowder lingering in the corridors like a ghost that refused to leave. The silence inside was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the old clock in the hallway and the soft sound of Lily humming to herself as she played with her doll, trying to pretend everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Damien stood in his office, his arm freshly bandaged, his blue eyes burning with restrained fury. The phone still lay on his desk, the image of betrayal replaying in his mind. The face of his own right-hand man, Marco, handing Victor his location, the same man who had once taken a bullet for him. The realization gnawed at him like rust eating through steel. For years, Marco had been the one man Damien trusted to watch his back, but now that trust had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. The door creaked open. 2 of Damien's guards dragged Marco inside, his wrists bound, his face pale, streaked with blood and sweat. Damien turned slowly, his expression unreadable, and the room seemed to grow colder. Why? Damien's voice was quiet, too quiet, the kind of tone that made hardened men tremble. Marco hesitated, eyes darting between the floor and the window as if searching for an escape from the truth. I didn't mean for it to go that far, he stammered. Victor offered me money, a way out. I thought he'd just use the info to scare you, not... His voice cracked when Damien slammed his fist on the desk, the sound echoing like thunder. Papers flew, a glass shattered, and everyone in the room flinched. Damien's composure was slipping, his veins pulsing with betrayal, rage, and disbelief. He had killed men for less, destroyed families over smaller treacheries. And now here stood Marco, his friend, his brother in arms, confessing to selling him out for money. "You sold me to the man who wanted me dead," Damien said slowly, his words shaking with barely contained rage. "You put Isabella and Lily in danger. You made me bleed for your greed." Marco fell to his knees, tears streaking his bruised face. "I'm sorry. Boss, I swear I didn't know he'd come for them. I just needed..." Damien stepped forward, grabbed him by the collar, and pulled him up so their faces were inches apart. His eyes blazed like ice over fire. Needed what? Blood money? A price for loyalty? The guards shifted uneasily, waiting for the inevitable gunshot that always followed betrayal. Even Isabella, standing quietly near the door, looked away, knowing what kind of man Damien used to be. But before Damien could reach for his gun, a small sound stopped him cold. "Uncle Damien!" a trembling voice called. He turned, startled. Lily stood there in the doorway, her little pink frock smudged with dust, her golden curls tangled. She had woken from a nap, hearing the shouting. She looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes that shimmered with tears. "Please, don't be bad again, Uncle Damien," she whispered, her tiny hand clutching the edge of his coat. The words hit him harder than any bullet ever could. For a long moment he couldn't breathe. The cold fury that had been coiled inside him like a viper loosened. He looked down at the little girl who had unknowingly become his conscience, the only pure thing left in his broken world, and suddenly the gun in his hand felt heavier than the guilt on his heart. Slowly, Damien released Marco, shoving him back against the wall. The room held its breath. "Take him away," he said finally, his voice low but trembling with restraint. His guards looked at one another, uncertain. "Boss, you want us to—" "No." Damien cut them off, his tone sharp. "He doesn't die today. He goes to the police. Let the law deal with what's left of him." Gasps rippled through the room. No one in Damien's world had ever seen mercy from him, not once. Even Isabella stared in disbelief, her lips parting slightly, as if she were seeing a stranger in front of her. Marco blinked, unable to comprehend his fate. He expected a bullet, not mercy. "Why?" he whispered. Damien's expression softened for the first time in years. Because if I kill you, I prove that I haven't changed, he said quietly. And I promised her, he glanced toward Lily, I wouldn't be bad again. The men hesitated, but eventually followed his order. As they led Marco out, Damien slumped into his chair, covering his face with his hands. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind exhaustion and an ache deeper than his gunshot wound. Isabella approached slowly, her eyes soft but wary. You could have killed him, she said. You had every right. Damien looked up at her, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. And then what? Go back to being the monster everyone remembers? I'm done spilling blood for ghosts. She studied him quietly for a moment, the lines of anger around her face softening. There was something different in his eyes now, a weariness but also peace. You're changing, she said softly. Damien's gaze drifted toward Lily, who had fallen asleep again on the couch, clutching her teddy bear. She's changing me, he murmured. She doesn't even know it, but she's saving me. The day dragged on. Damien's men cleared the grounds, patched the walls, replaced the broken glass, and tried to restore order. But an invisible heaviness lingered in the mansion. The knowledge that betrayal had come from within gnawed at everyone. By evening, a strange calm had settled. Isabella was in the library reading to Lily, her voice low and soothing, while Damien stood outside on the balcony, staring at the horizon. Snow began to fall again, soft, almost forgiving. For the first time in years, he let himself breathe. Maybe, he thought, this was what redemption felt like. Fragile, fleeting, but real. Then the butler entered, breaking the peace. Sir, he said cautiously, holding an envelope. This just arrived. It was delivered by hand. Damien frowned and took it, the chill in the air deepening as he noticed the red wax seal, a familiar symbol pressed into it. The serpent around a cross, Victor Kane's mark. His stomach dropped. It's addressed to Miss Isabella, the butler added hesitantly. Damien's pulse quickened. He called her over, his hands tightening around the envelope before passing it to her. Isabella's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a small card, white at first glance, but stained dark red at one corner. A Christmas card. Her breath caught as she read the words scrawled across it in Victor's handwriting. See you at the church where it all began. The card slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor. Damien picked it up slowly, his jaw tightening as he recognized the church's name written faintly beneath the message. The same church where years ago, Isabella had once prayed for him to change. The same place where his life as a criminal had begun. Outside, unseen through the snowfall, a figure watched from across the street. A man in a dark coat holding a lighter engraved with Victor's initials. He smirked, lit a cigarette, and whispered into a phone, "They took the bait. The church is ready." The storm had quieted into a whisper as Damien's car glided through the sleeping streets of New York. The headlights carved pale paths through the falling snow, reflecting off the wet cobblestones like shattered glass. Isabella sat in the back seat, clutching Lily tightly, her heart pounding in terror and disbelief. Every mile that took them closer to the old church brought back ghosts of a past she thought she'd buried. Memories of blood, betrayal, and love that refused to die. The church stood at the edge of the city, forgotten by time, a relic of their first meeting when Damien had stumbled inside years ago, bleeding from gunshot wounds, and Isabella, then a nurse volunteering at a shelter, had saved his life. Tonight, it would become the stage for redemption or ruin. Damien's breath fogged the air as he stepped out, his black coat whipping in the wind. He turned to Isabella and said softly, "Stay behind me, no matter what happens." She wanted to protest, to tell him she couldn't lose him again, but before she could, the massive oak doors creaked open, and there stood Victor Kane, smirking, bruised and armed, his eyes glinting with madness under the candlelight. "You stole my wife, my empire, and now my daughter?" Victor's voice echoed through the stone hall like a curse. Damien's expression remained cold, unflinching. "You stole their peace," he replied, his voice calm but heavy with finality. The tension in the air could be cut with a knife. Snowflakes drifted through the cracked stained glass windows, landing on the marble floor as silent witnesses to the confrontation. Lily whimpered softly, burying her face in Isabella's coat as Damien stepped forward. "It ends tonight, Victor," he said. "One of us walks away free." Victor's smile twisted into something feral. "You really think you can erase what you are, Moretti? You can't wash blood with snow." Then, with a roar, he lunged. The two men crashed into the pews, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the empty church. Candles toppled, flames flickering against the walls as they exchanged brutal blows, fists, elbows, and shattered glass raining around them. Damien's coat tore, blood splattering his sleeve, but he fought with a calm, born of purpose, not rage. Every punch was for the years of pain Victor had caused Isabella, every kick for the tears Lily had shed on the frozen streets. Victor, fueled by jealousy and hate, fought like a cornered animal. "You took everything from me," he roared. Damien pinned him against the altar, panting, his knuckles bleeding. "You did that yourself," he said through clenched teeth. "All I ever wanted was peace." The gun clattered to the floor, sliding between them. For a brief, breathless moment, neither moved. Snowflakes swirled through the open doorway, settling on their bloodied faces. Then Damien, his chest heaving, reached for the gun, but stopped. He looked at Victor, broken and trembling on the ground, and saw not a rival, but a reflection of who he used to be, consumed by hate, blind to everything human. His hand fell away from the weapon. "I won't kill you," Damien said quietly. "Not tonight. My war ends here." The silence that followed felt eternal. Isabella's tears shimmered in the candlelight as she whispered his name. Lily's small hand reached out toward him, her voice trembling. "Uncle Damien, please come back." He turned to her, forcing a weak smile. But behind him, Victor laughed, a bitter, rasping sound that made the air colder. "You think mercy will save you?" he croaked. "You think love will fix a monster like you?" Damien frowned, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. Victor's right hand moved slightly, his fingers twitching against his chest. And then Damien saw it, the faint red light blinking beneath Victor's coat. A small device, metallic, sinister, its button worn but deadly familiar. The detonator. Victor's smile spread wider, blood staining his teeth. "I may lose," he whispered, "but you'll burn with me." Damien's eyes widened, his heart pounding like thunder. Isabella gasped, clutching Lily as realization struck. The walls seemed to close in, the candles flickered violently as the scent of gasoline filled the air. Damien lunged forward, shouting, "Isabella, get out!" Victor presses the detonator. A deafening click echoes through the church, and the candles extinguish all at once, leaving nothing but darkness. The echo of Damien's scream, and the red glow pulsing in Victor's trembling hand. The moment Victor's thumb hit the detonator, time fractured. Damien's instincts took over. He lunged for Isabella and Lily, wrapping his arms around them and diving toward the church's open doorway as a roar of fire and shattered stone erupted behind them. The explosion swallowed everything in a storm of heat and light. The stained glass windows burst into a million shards of color, scattering through the snow like dying stars. The shock wave hurled them into the snow outside, Damien shielding both mother and child with his body. For a moment there was nothing but the roar of flames devouring the church that once symbolized hope. Smoke clawed at the sky, embers drifted down like burning snowflakes. Isabella's scream tore through the chaos as she pushed herself up, coughing, eyes wild with terror. "Damien!" she cried, her voice cracking. Lily clung to her mother, sobbing into her coat as the night wind howled through the ruins. Through the haze, Isabella saw him, lying motionless amid the debris, his shirt torn, his face streaked with ash and blood. His hand, trembling even in unconsciousness, clutched something tightly against his chest. She stumbled toward him, falling to her knees, the cold biting through her skin as she pressed her hands against his chest. "Please, no, don't leave us," she whispered, tears mixing with soot. When she pried open his hand, she saw what he held, the tiny silver pendant that belonged to Lily, now bent and burned, but still gleaming faintly in the firelight. Her sobs deepened. She kissed his forehead, whispering, "You promised to be better. Don't break it now." Sirens wailed in the distance, a symphony of salvation cutting through the night. Firefighters and police rushed to the scene, dragging hoses through the snow, shouting orders. Isabella stayed with Damien, refusing to move even as paramedics tried to lift him. She held his hand the entire way to the hospital, her lips never leaving his knuckles, whispering prayers between gasps. Hours blurred into days. The world outside celebrated Christmas. Lights twinkled on every window, laughter echoed in the streets, but inside the sterile, quiet hospital room, time stood still. Damien lay motionless, his face pale against the white sheets, a faint beep from the monitor marking the fragile rhythm of his life. Lily brought him a small paper star she had folded from a hospital brochure, placing it beside his bed. "So he won't be scared of the dark," she said softly, her innocence cutting through the gloom. Isabella sat beside him night after night, watching the rise and fall of his chest, remembering everything. The first time she saw him bleeding in the church years ago, the man she tried to save, and the monster he became. But now, lying broken before her, he wasn't the ruthless Mafia boss anymore. He was just Damien, the man she had once loved. On the fifth morning, sunlight streamed gently through the curtains, painting the room in gold. Isabella stirred awake to a faint sound. She blinked, thinking it was the machines, but then she heard it again, a hoarse whisper. "Isabella." Her head snapped up. Damien's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then softening when they met hers. A smile trembled on her lips as she cupped his cheek. "You're awake," she breathed, tears spilling freely. Lily gasped, rushing to the bed and hugging him as gently as she could. "You scared us, Uncle Damien," she cried, her tiny fingers brushing his bandaged arm. Damien's eyes glistened as he looked at them, his only reason to keep breathing. His voice was weak but full of emotion. "You both saved me, not from bullets, but from myself." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Isabella broke down, pressing her forehead to his hand. For once there was no past, no violence, no titles, just the fragile warmth of three souls who had survived hell together. Hours later, when the doctor declared him stable, Isabella wheeled him outside to the hospital garden. Snowflakes drifted lazily around them, the air crisp with renewal. The city stretched beyond, glittering under the morning sun, alive and peaceful. Damien inhaled deeply, closing his eyes as if tasting freedom for the first time. "I used to think redemption was for saints," he said softly. "Now I know it's for those who are brave enough to face their ghosts." Isabella's eyes shimmered. "You've changed, Damien," she whispered. "The man I once knew is gone." He turned to her with a faint smile. Maybe he needed to die, so this one could live. She laughed quietly through her tears. Lily twirled in the snow nearby, giggling, her golden hair glowing in the light, like a little angel who had unknowingly saved a sinner's soul. As the wind rustled through the trees, Damien shifted slightly, wincing but determined. His hand slipped into his coat pocket and emerged holding something small, blackened, covered in dust, yet unmistakably precious. Isabella frowned in confusion as he slowly opened his hand, revealing a ring box, singed from the explosion but still intact. Her breath caught in her throat. "Damien." He opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a diamond ring, simple, elegant, untouched by the flames. His voice broke as he whispered, "I was going to give you this before the blast. I thought it was gone, but maybe some things are meant to survive." He took her hand, his eyes shimmering with hope and guilt all at once. "Isabella," he said, his voice barely a whisper, Will you let me try again? Not as the man I was, but as the man you believed I could be." Before Isabella can answer, Lily runs toward them, pointing at a figure standing beyond the garden gate, tall, in a black coat, watching silently. The wind carries a faint glint of a gun under his sleeve. The nightmare might not be over. The bells of St. Augustine's rang softly through the morning mist, echoing across the city that once whispered Damien Moretti's name in fear. Months had passed since the explosion that almost took his life, and the scars that remained on his body were nothing compared to the ones healing in his soul. The same church that had been reduced to rubble now stood proudly rebuilt, washed in light and forgiveness. Its doors were open wide and sunlight streamed through the new stained glass windows, scattering colors across the polished floor like fragments of hope. Outside, snowflakes danced lazily in the air, gliding down onto the marble steps as people gathered. Friends, neighbors, and even men who once served under Damien's command. No one carried guns anymore. No one whispered about debts or territory. They came in peace, dressed in smiles, because this day was not about the past. It was about rebirth. Inside, the faint hum of music drifted through the air, the scent of roses mingling with candle smoke. Damien stood at the altar, tall and graceful, no longer the cold flame of the underworld, but a man reborn in white. His black hair brushed neatly back, his blue eyes soft with gratitude and calm. Around him, the flicker of candles reflected off the golden cross, a symbol of the faith he had rediscovered through love. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie, but not out of fear, out of disbelief that after all the blood, the fire, the darkness, he was still here, that he was about to marry the only woman who had ever seen goodness in him when the rest of the world called him a monster. The doors creaked open, and the melody of soft piano filled the church. Damien's breath caught. There, at the far end of the aisle, stood Isabella. Her gown shimmered like moonlight, simple yet breathtaking, her veil drifting behind her like a whisper of heaven. Lily skipped ahead of her, wearing a pink frock and scattering flower petals that fluttered through the air like snowflakes. The congregation smiled as the little girl giggled, turning occasionally to make sure her mother followed. Isabella's eyes glistened with emotion as she walked, every step erasing the miles of pain that had once separated them. When she reached Damien, their eyes met, and in that silent gaze lived 1,000 memories. The night he almost died, the moment he chose mercy over vengeance, the time he whispered a prayer for the first time in years. Isabella smiled through her tears. "You're not the man I met years ago," she said softly, her voice trembling with both love and disbelief. Damien smiled gently, brushing away a tear from her cheek. "No," he whispered back, "I'm the man your daughter made me become." The crowd exhaled collectively, touched by the raw sincerity in his words. The priest began the ceremony, his voice steady, sacred, filling the church with warmth. As he spoke of love, forgiveness, and faith, Damien felt every word sink deep into his soul. The ghosts of his past seemed to fade with each vow he made. He remembered the men he lost, the choices that haunted him, the sins that once chained him. But now, standing beside Isabella, holding her hands, he understood that redemption was never about erasing the past. It was about transforming it. And she had done that. Isabella and the little angel with golden hair who had appeared on a snowy Christmas night and melted the ice around his heart. When the priest asked if anyone objected, silence filled the hall, not from fear, but from peace. Even the city outside seemed to pause, as if honoring this moment. Damien slipped the ring onto Isabella's finger, his voice shaking as he said, "With this, I promise to protect you, to cherish you, and to never let darkness touch our home again." She smiled, whispering, "And I promise to remind you every day that light can grow even in the shadows." When their lips met, the church erupted in applause. Snow began to fall through the open doors, drifting down in gentle waves, as if heaven itself was blessing them. Lily squealed happily, clapping her hands. "They're married," she shouted, running into Damien's arms as he bent down to lift her. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "You're the reason I found her again." The little girl beamed proudly. "Mommy said miracles happen at Christmas," she said, her voice bright and pure, and she was right. Laughter filled the room, soft, joyful, unrestrained. For once there were no shadows in Damien Moretti's eyes, only peace. Outside, the city that once feared his name now spoke it with admiration. Stories spread of how the infamous Mafia boss had disbanded his empire, given his wealth to rebuild shelters, schools, and orphanages. The man who once ruled with violence now ruled hearts with compassion. He visited prisons, helping lost souls find a second chance. He even forgave those who betrayed him, including Marco, who had begun working as a counselor for troubled youth. Damien's mansion no longer echoed with gunfire. It rang with laughter and music, with Lily's footsteps running through the hallways and Isabella's soft singing in the evenings. Every Christmas, he visited the graveyard behind the church, laying a single white rose for those who never made it to redemption, whispering a prayer for peace. Years later, people would say the snow seemed brighter around the Moretti home during the holidays. Some swore they saw a faint glow near the old church, like angels guarding a promise fulfilled. But for Damien, the miracle was not in the lights or the snowfall. It was in the laughter of the little girl who once sat alone on a freezing street, and in the love of the woman who had the courage to forgive a sinner. Together, they built something stronger than any empire, a family born from ashes and grace. As the church bells rang one last time, a shadow lingered in the crowd, a man in a gray coat, watching from afar. In his hand gleamed a silver pendant identical to Lily's, its surface engraved with a single letter, V. A faint smile curved his lips before he disappeared into the falling snow, leaving behind the whisper that not all ghosts rest easily.